In this video, I'm going to show you how to go from not being able to read any books at all to being able to read as many books as you want. I'm 30 and I have ADHD, and up until about 5 years ago, I wasn't able to read any books at all. I was literate, I had the ability to read, but every time I would sit down and try to read a book, I would either get really bored or distracted, or I would read 2 to 3 sentences and then completely forget what I just read and then give up. So I came up with my own techniques to finally be able to finish a book. I'm going to show you all of the methods that I have to read books when you have ADHD. Be sure to stay until the end because I actually included a bonus tip to be able to remember what you read. A lot of the tips in this video actually apply to non-fiction books, but some apply to any book. Tip number 1 is to not actually read the entire book. If you're reading a non-fiction book like this one here, where you're trying to get a specific answer to a specific question, then you don't actually need to read the entire book. In the case of this book, the author actually recommends that you don't even read the entire book and only read what you need to get the results of what you're looking for. Many books are filled with either fluff or extra information or stories, where if you have ADHD, you might begin to get distracted or bored, or that might make you feel like reading or finishing the book might be really tedious. So what I first do is I open the book and I look through the chapters and I see where exactly the information is that I'm looking for. Then once I find those chapters, I go to the subheadings in those chapters and see exactly where that information is that I'm looking for. And that's it. But that might bring the question, well, what if the entire book applies to me and I want to read the entire thing? Well, that brings up the next tip, which is to take your time. I've spent so much time trying to rush through a book as quickly as possible that I not only missed a lot of information, but I also pretty much forgot everything that I read. If you're reading through a book and actually decide that you want to read through the whole thing, then this tip can be actually very helpful. Before starting to read a book, I just tell myself that it'll take however long it needs to take for me to finish. Our ADHD brains are not like everyone else's, so why would we expect it to get things done like everyone else? I know you hear other people talking about how they finish books in a week or even in a few days, but even if you finish a book within 1 to 2 months, that's still reading between 6 to 12 books a year if you plan on reading multiple books. If I go into a book expecting for it to take a while, then I don't feel as rushed and I don't feel like I need to finish it as quickly as possible. Now, you may experience hyperfocus while you're reading through the book, but if you don't, then that's okay. Don't try to force it and give yourself as much time as you need. The next tip is only read books that you're interested in. Now, I don't know about you, but when I was going through school, I would dread reading books in English class or any class really. I would either fall asleep or become extremely distracted, and I absolutely hated it. As an adult, I realized that this was because I was being forced to read books that I wasn't interested in at all. Once I realized this, I started by trying to read multiple genres and see which ones I was interested in. I eventually found out that I love to read books on personal finance, self-improvement, business, and fitness. These books answered specific questions that I had about topics that I was very interested in. Since then, I only buy or read books that fit these categories. The next tip I have is to eliminate distractions. This is a very important one. I don't care what I'm reading. If there's a bunch of distractions going on around me, then I won't be able to focus on anything. Distractions can be in the form of people, noises, things that you can see, or anything else around you that grabs your attention. When reading a book, I'll either sit on the couch in the living room or read in my car. Both of these are pretty dull or non-exciting areas with not a lot of distractions. I also put my phone on vibrate or silent and make sure that it's not within arm's reach. Usually, if I can see my phone or something else that I know will distract me, I'm way more likely to get distracted by it. My next tip is to make sure that the area that I'm reading in is very well lit. Now, this one might not apply to everyone, but it certainly does work for me. I know that if I'm not in a well-lit room or area, then I'm way more likely to get sleepy and lose focus. My ADHD brain has a way of making me feel really sleepy or tired when I have to do productive things, and this is especially true when it's dark. I try to use as much light as possible. This also helps me see the words on the page a lot clearer and creates a lot less distraction, so more of my energy can go towards reading than trying to actually see the words on the page. My next tip is to take your medication. Now, I'm no medical professional and you should always follow your doctor's recommendations, but when I don't take my ADHD medication, it's extremely difficult for me to sit and read a book unless I'm very, very engaged in reading that book. For me, taking my medication makes a huge difference, especially if I'm trying to read about an hour to an hour and a half right after taking my medication. This also just makes it so I don't have to force myself to read. My brain just cooperates and I'm able to focus on what I'm trying to read. The next tip is don't force it. Usually when I made up my mind that I was going to sit and read for a specific amount of time, I would not stop and I would try to sit there as long as possible until that time limit was reached. changed. This led to me not only being very disappointed and frustrated with myself, but also led to me wasting that time because I would ultimately end up not reading anything at all. So I decided that I would tell myself I would start reading at a certain time and read for as long as my brain would allow me to read. If that meant only 3 minutes, then so be it. Sometimes I would be able to read only for that long, and other times I would be able to read for an hour or even more. The point here is to not force it. Once I saw that I was either getting very bored or tired or distracted, I would just stop and do something else. Now, in the beginning of this video, I mentioned that I would have a bonus tip for remembering what you read, and that tip is to simply just write notes. However, I have a specific way that I write notes. I don't actually recommend highlighting, because what I would do is I would start highlighting in books expecting that my later self would go back and reread over the portions of the book that I highlighted, but I would never actually do that. Now, what I would actually do is when I was reading a book, I would keep a notebook next to me, and when I would find a portion of the book that I found to be specifically valuable or important to me, I would write down that line and the page number so that I would have the information that I wanted to remember, and I would be able to go back to that page and read the entire page if I decided I wanted to do that. Now, this doesn't really work if you write down the entire book basically, but remember that a lot of books are filled with fluff or extra information that's not really necessary. So only take the bits that are really important to you. And that's it. If you want to watch more videos like this with ADHD tips, please go ahead and subscribe.